Welcome to the All Access Entertainment Podcast. I am your host, Joseph Bruen, and as we continue on with Sci-Fi Week, it doesn't get any better than this. A very special guest. You may know him from film, you may know him from theater, and of course you may know him from television, and millions around the world know him as Bib Fortuna from, of course, Return of the Jedi and the Star Wars franchise. Ladies and gentlemen, the legendary Michael Carter, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here this week as we take a little deep dive into your career. So rewinding back to the very beginning, growing up as a child, what are your earliest memories of film and entertainment?
Blimey, I mean, you've got to remember I'm very old, okay? I was not very long after Second World War in 1947, and Britain was a very peculiar place to live then. It was, still had rationing and stuff like that, and I remember all the men would have these little bags that would carry things in, which were the army combat bags. And my first memory of film is silent film. Where I lived, there was a wood, and in the middle of the wood was a Nissen hut, which was one of the kind of huts they built in the war for a variety of reasons, sometimes to accommodate soldiers or whatever. Sometimes all sorts of things went on in these Nissen huts. So after the war, a lot of them were derelict. Some of them were pulled down, some of them were just left. And there was a Nissen hut very close to where we lived. And every Saturday afternoon, a man came round with a huge projector and big rolls of film. And he set up a cinema within this Nissen hut. And all the kids in the neighborhood would be in there because the parents would pay the guy sixpence, a tanner, a few cents, because they knew they could get rid of the kids for the afternoon and they'd be safe. And I just saw they were all silent movies. There might have been one or two kind of Tom Mix films, the old westerns that they made in the 20s and 30s, the serials. That's all I remember. Also, I remember being utterly terrified by a Laurel and Hardy film where Oliver Hardy was hanging onto a windowsill by his fingertips, and then he fell and he broke into 1,000 pieces. I mean, it obviously is done with a dummy, but that scared me. I had nightmares about that for years.
Wow.
So that's my first taste of films. It was all fashioned, silent, black and white movie films. My father was a musician. When he was a boy, he used to earn extra pocket money playing the piano for silent films way back around the time of the First World War. I mean, he was like the richest kid in town. And he would just improvise. At the age of 12, he'd improvise all this music. So there was a sort of connection to film. My father loved old silent films, and he would go into raptures if any of the old Laurel and Hardy or Buster Keaton movies appeared on TV. He'd become that 12-year-old kid again,
Wow.
That was it.
And at what point did you decide, you know what, this is something I'd like to give a shot, and I want to do this myself?
I don't know if I ever really made that decision, to be honest. My dad was an organist in the church. He was Sunday. He played Sunday every Sunday, and he decided to do a Christmas pantomime. That's a very British kind of entertainment. We did it in the summer, even though it was a pantomime. Should have done it at Christmas, and I was going to be in it. I was about 7 or 8, so because I was his son, I got a good part. I played a character called Soapy Sam, who was one of the robbers in the woods. It was a comedy duo with a guy called Harry Dempster. We got all the laughs. And that was the first thing I'd ever done. But it was just a joke. And I did 3 years of that and then stopped it. And then at the end of my senior schooling at an academy in Scotland, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Absolutely no idea. I'd applied to university to do courses I wasn't remotely interested in. And they were going to do a production of Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing at school. And I applied. I auditioned for a role in the Watch, which is small roles, comic roles. I thought it'd be good to, just behave like an idiot on stage. And lo and behold, the teacher gave me the leading role of Benedict. So suddenly I had to learn all the script of Shakespeare. And I did it, and people started saying, you could be a professional actor. You've got a natural facility. I didn't believe it. I mean, I come from a small town in Scotland. Nobody becomes a professional actor. There are a couple of people who've done that. You just wouldn't think of anything like that. Being an artist was considered way out and weird. Being an actor, that was beyond the pale. But the local Amdram Society, Amateur Dramatic Society, saw me and invited me to join them. And I joined them. And when I was there, one or two of them said, you should try and go to drama school. You could probably be an actor. I didn't really want to. I knew nothing about the professional theatre or anything. I'd seen, movies, films in the local cinema, all those films from the 60s, early 60s, late 50s. The odd thing on television, the old John Ford movies and all that sort of stuff. But I knew nothing about acting as a serious thing to do. And I was persuaded by a guy at this amateur theatre group who was one of the directors, who was the local tax collector, in actual fact. He wasn't a very popular guy, but he was a nice fellow. He persuaded me to apply to some drama schools, and he coached me in my audition pieces. So I went along. The first drama school I auditioned at was the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, which is probably the biggest, most difficult to get into. And I decided, because I didn't really think I could be an actor or know what it entailed, that I would do the audition at RADA, but if I didn't get in, I wasn't going to audition anywhere else. I'd find something else to do, go off and do some course or wherever. Anyway, I did my audition at RADA, and I think I had the power of absolute naivety, because I really did not know what I was talking about. I didn't try to pretend I knew what I was talking about. I was just this Scots teenager with heather growing out my ears, coming down to the big city, not knowing what the hell was going on. And I didn't know those are the kind of people they like. They don't like ex-professionals because they've got opinions. They like people who don't know much about it, so they can really train them up, a bit like training a puppy,
Right.
So I was told if I received a letter within a week, it would mean I hadn't got a place. I'd be called back for a second set of auditions in 3 months' time. I went back home to Scotland, got a letter 2 days later, so I knew it was I'd been declined, I'd been refused. I opened the letter, and it was an acceptance. I got an immediate acceptance. So my father was very pleased, my mother wasn't. And I didn't have any other choices. I kind of went off and went to drama school and spent 2.5 years there and became an actor. Emerged on the other side of it as a young, professional actor. And that was it. So I didn't really, at any point, think I want to be an actor. I wasn't inspired to be an actor. I just became one by accident, probably.
Just kind of fell into it. That's great.
Yeah.
So 1971 would be your first television role with Doctor Who.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, being a part of that, and for the first time?
Well, it was great. It was, there were only 3 TV channels in Britain at that time. There was BBC One, which would do things like Doctor Who and serious plays and stuff. And there was BBC Two, which tended to do nothing but arts programs, documentaries and stuff like that. And there was ITV, which was the commercial TV, and they would do loads of stuff. So there wasn't much television around. There really wasn't. There was no film industry in Britain at that time to speak of. So if you got a part in TV, that was something. And I got a very, very small part. I only had about 2 lines or something like yes, sir, and no, sir, or something like that. But it was just great to go and see what it was like to do television. And we shot on location down in Dover Castle on the south coast of London. We had all these gunfights and stuff like that, firing all these automatic weapons with blanks in them. That was great fun. You could do that then. After the whole problem of the IRA blew up, you couldn't do that. You weren't allowed to fire rifles with blanks. And then you would go back in the studio and you'd shoot the stuff in the studio. And in those days, if you were actually cutting from, a location where you had filmed something to an interior where you were actually being recorded on videotape in these huge, huge cameras they would run the film on these monitors, and you would literally start your scene as soon as the film ended. So it was almost like a live performance.
Oh, wow.
You'd watch it, and you would just go into the scene. So it was kind of really quite tricky in those days. I did 2 or 3 little tallies. One of them was a live one, and they were really nerve-wracking. My God, But it was great doing Doctor Who. John Pertwee was the Doctor. He was great fun. We used to have these sing-alongs in the evening in the hotel we were staying in, and he would just sing comic songs. He was very, very funny. And we had a guy who could play the piano. He was a stunt man, but he could just improvise to anything. So it was just great fun. I was like 22 years old. It was just, terrific.
And you had such a positive experience. And then 10 years later, you'd make your film debut with An American Werewolf in London in 1981. What are some of the differences between television and film as far as producing it and being a part of that type of project?
Well, certainly in those days, film took much longer. It was a question of economics. They had more money than television things. And secondly, technically, film was vastly superior. Certainly in Britain, we were shooting on these old 16mm cameras, which produced a very small picture it looked like you were shooting through the bottom of a bottle. It was so indistinct. Whereas, 35mm movie camera was terrific. So you had much more time to get things right. We did there's a shot in the underground, the subway, where my character's running on down, and he ends up being killed by the werewolf. We took all night to do that, from about 9, 10 o'clock one night right up till about 6:30 in the morning. Now, if you'd been shooting that on television, you'd have done the whole thing in an hour and a half. That would be it, because there just wasn't money to do anything else. So it was much more considered. You really felt you had the time, space to breathe into it. And if you made a mistake, it didn't matter so much. Just do it again, Whereas TV, you made a mistake, people would get a bit tense. So it was much more relaxed doing a movie. And also it was a film. It was a cinema film. It was, the real thing. I think in a sense it's what we all wanted to be in, ultimately. We all wanted to be up there on the big screen.
And you would join, of course, Return of the Jedi, which was the third installation of the Star Wars franchise at that point. At that point, the franchise was already larger than life, such a huge franchise. So at that point, when you're casted, what is the auditioning process like that for that film?
Well, I think the auditioning process was for most people who played my kind of part was pretty open. It was sort of one of the actors would be asked by George, "Do you know any of your mates who could play this role?" And they'd reel off a string of friends and they'd see them. For me, it was more formal. It was a straightforward. My agent rang me, go to Twickenham Film Studios, which is actually just across the river from where I live. Meet this guy called Richard Marquand. I knew who he was. He'd done some kind of big scale TV stuff. And it's about a science fiction film, and we know absolutely nothing at all about it, which was not normal. Agents normally get a breakdown and they tell you all about the film, tell you all about your character. My agent said it's just they haven't sent a breakdown. It's called Blue Harvest. That's all I know. So I literally went to Twickenham Film Studios and met Richard and just had a straightforward interview for the job without really knowing what I was letting myself in for. And frankly, not being that interested. I was actually filming something at the time, a TV series I was in. So I was in work and I wasn't that bothered. And I thought, an alien, do I want to play an alien? Some science fiction thing. I mean, all the science fiction films I'd seen, apart from 2001, looked like they were made in somebody's kitchen. You had flying saucers with fishing guts spinning them around and
Right.
people with body-tight clothes and had pistols that looked like, they were ray guns that looked like water pistols. So I wasn't exactly overawed by the prospect of science fiction. And so at the end of the interview, he actually asked me if I'd like the job. That doesn't really happen very often. You usually go away and you wait. He said, "Do you want the job?" And I said, "No, I don't think I do, Richard, to be honest. I don't think I do." He said, "Well, look, come on, let me..." He just worked on me, And in the end, he said, "Come on, do it. It'll be great fun. It's 5 weeks' work. It's a big movie, and, you're going to be one of the little... It's the smallest role, but it's going to be a significant role. You'll have fun doing it." So I said, "Okay, all right." Starting in January, this was September. He said, "Okay, if you're going to do it, I'll tell you what it is. okay, what is it? It's the next Star Wars film. And I went, oh. Now, I didn't know that much about Star Wars because I'd missed the first one because I was working in the theatre. And in those days, if you didn't catch it in the cinema, you missed it, you know? It was never going to appear on TV. And I'd missed it. And there was a big fuss about this film called Star Wars. I had no idea what it was about. I then worked with Tony, C-3PO, on stage. And we went to see his next film, which was Empire Strikes Back. And I have to say, I was really impressed with that. Suddenly there was this sophisticated effects. I'm sitting there in the cinema thinking, how the hell did they do that,
Yeah.
So I knew it was a big gig. And, I kind of lit up a bit. And he said, he explained it to me very briefly what it was going to be. And he said, what you mustn't do is you mustn't tell anybody about this. Don't tell a soul. Nobody. I mean, nobody. Your agent will know, but nobody else must know. So, fine. I never encountered that kind of confidentiality thing first time. So I went straight home and told the kids. But I said to them, don't tell anyone, okay? Don't tell anyone. I told everybody, of course.
Of course.
So that really was it. And then I started going up and doing the pre-production, going up to Bruen Wood, which was interesting, meeting all the techies.
And Bib Fortuna is such an iconic character. I mean, my personal favorite as a kid was also the very first action figure that I got as a child. So I have some fond memories. I always loved the character. It was just a great presentation. So, thank you for your contributions because it was certainly a big piece of my childhood. And that role is one that stands out to this day.
Great, thank you. It's kind of the makeup does most of the job for you,
Oh, it was great though, all the way around. And when it comes to the makeup and the molding or the casting that they put on you, what was the process like? How long did that take per day to get that on?
Well, the first time we tried it was for just for a test, a lighting test, on the Friday before the first day of principal photography, and that took 8.5 hours to get on. And Nick Hudman, who made it and applied it, he rotated me round in the dressing room so that I was facing the wrong way. I was facing away from the mirror, so I couldn't see what was happening. I think I might have asked him to do that, actually. I didn't want to see what Bib looked like until it was finished. And then, so he started applying it, and he got it on eventually. And once it was all on, everybody came in, and George and Richard and various people, David Tomlin, they were kind of staring at me. I was sitting in this chair. Wow, wow. And then Nick got me up. I couldn't really see anything through those red contact lenses. They hadn't been made very well. It was nothing at all to do with Richard Glass, the optician who looked after me. And they led me to a full-length mirror. And I closed my eyes, and then I opened my eyes, and I saw the full image of Bib. And that image was really, in a sense, what told me how to play him, It was like doing a mask exercise. We used to do mask exercises at drama school where you'd literally contemplate a mask for 20 minutes, half an hour. You'd put it on a particularly ritualistic way, and then you'd do a 10-second exercise. And that was all. So I was kind of well up to just looking at something and kind of trying to get something from it. And that's how Bib was created to a degree. It was all in the image. The image told me in a way how to play him. It was just slightly kind of this almost effete but slightly malevolent creature. A bit lost at times, a bit slow, and quite threatening at other times. So that was it. It was then every day I did. The first call I was in the film studio the following Monday, first day of photography, 3:00 in the morning. They started sticking it on me. It was a freezing cold day. And it was like that for a while. Nick got faster and faster at doing it until Richard eventually started. Richard was the optician. He would put my eyes in just before we'd do the take, and then he'd take them out as soon as we'd done the take, and he was always inspecting my eyes and squirting my eyes with medication of some description. He started timing us how long it would take us to put on the makeup, Nick to put on the makeup. He'd literally say 3, 2, 1, go. And Nick would start gluing it all on. So it became a kind of thing, to get it faster and faster and faster. And on my final day's filming, the final Friday, which was 5 weeks later, Nick got everything on in 59 minutes and 48 seconds.
Wow.
So he got it under the hour. He got so adept at it. As long as the pieces had been made properly, they'd blown properly, and the edges were fine, the bits that he actually glued on my face, just the edge. As long as they were fine and they weren't wrinkled, he could get it on quite quickly. But if they were wrinkled, it was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And of course, it kept coming off as well during the day and be re-glued on again.
And what was the head made out of exactly?
It was all blown rubber, very lightweight rubber, apart from the actual skull piece, which was covered in blown rubber. That was polyurethane, which was quite light. It was all very light. But it got to feel very heavy by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I had a dentist's chair in the studio just off set, which they would stick me in. I could put my head back on and rest the dome on the top of the dentist's chair. And I had a dentist's chair back in my dressing room, so I could just rest my head. Because the weight was constantly pulling your head back,
And you mentioned that the eyes were difficult. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No? What were you saying?
You mentioned that the eyes were a little difficult to deal with. How about the teeth?
The teeth made speaking quite difficult. I really had to articulate because they sort of made me sound a bit like that. It might have been interesting if I played a bit like that. Do you want to play?
Right.
And I had to, it was hilarious. And they kept falling out. And there was one scene where I managed to, I was doing a scene with Mark. It was eventually cut and it was kind of transferred somewhere else. And Mark had said a line and I panicked. I thought I'd missed my cue and I kind of spat the line out, my next line out at Mark, quite literally spat it. And my teeth shot out. I hit him in the shoulder,
Oh.
Cut! You get the teeth? Yeah. So they were a bit of a nuisance. They were constantly becoming slack and moving around my mouth the whole time.
And some of your lines were very memorable. How was it? Did they tell you how to speak? How did you get that actual twang that you used for that?
No, I just did it. We just did it. I mean, I had a long scene with Mark, which was the one that was called the one where my teeth flew out and bit him. In Hotie's walking down the long corridor, where he meets the droids. He meets Mark there. That was the original shot. It was no longer exists. And Mark and I kind of worked out what we were saying to each other, what was underneath this nonsense language. So that was kind of okay. As we kind of knew we were able to kind of create a sort of intention in what we were doing. We were interacting. The only problem we both had was we'd know our lines. I know my lines. He knew his lines. But I could never quite get on top of his lines, and he could never quite get on top of my lines because it was a nonsense language. Usually in a scene, you know everybody's lines. So we were never quite sure when to come in, That was the only problem we had. So it was quite stilted, in fact. But we would work out what the lines meant and just play the intention. And that enabled us to, to say them with some degree of conviction, I suppose. There were different rumors about what the language was. I mean, the one, I'm sure it's probably apocryphal, it's probably not true, but the one doing the circuit when I was there was that it was some kind of African dialect run backwards. But, I mean, nobody confirmed that. Nobody but the script writers actually knew, and they weren't going to tell us.
Right. Now, the set of Jabba's Palace, what was that like, to be a part of? What was the size actually like, and how many people were involved at a time?
Well, the studio it was in was quite big, but it was a box set. It was built in a, corner of the studio. It was actually quite small, quite confined. There were a huge number of people, maybe 40 people there, 30, 40 people. all dressed up in these weird costumes. So it became incredibly hot. And you would hear the noise of mooring guards fainting, hitting the ground. There'd be this terrible thud, boom, cut, cut. David Tomlin, the first assistant director, looking after everyone. So it actually wasn't that big at all compared to, some of the other sets, which were huge, absolutely huge. And as I said, because it was small, it was because the kind of lights they used in those days, which were the old-fashioned types of lights they'd used since the year dot, it got to be really hot, really, really hot, very, very uncomfortable. They were very good about giving us breaks, getting us off, making sure we were hydrated. Anybody who felt sick was led away. And, one afternoon, for example, I used to get a terrible itch under this polyurethane skull on top of me. It would always itch a bit. And I kind of learned by default that by trial and error, the best thing to do was to shampoo my hair every third day. I think it was every third day. If I went to 4 days, on the fourth day it was so itchy it'd drive me nuts. And if I shampooed it every second day, it would drive me nuts.
Yeah.
So I was able to kind of endure it most of the time until one day I just couldn't endure it. I knew as soon as the skull was on, Nick had put it on at 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning. It was going to be a bad day. I lasted till about 2:30 that afternoon. And by then, it was driving me so insane, I'd have given my children away, just about to get rid of it. I went out to big David Tomlin, who's the first AD who ran the very famous AD who ran the set, ran it really well. And I just said to him, David, and he knew exactly what it was. He said, is it your scalp? I said, no. He said, God, everybody must have called us, got to go home. Take him back to the dressing room, get this off. So Nick and Richard whisked me back to the dressing room. Nick planted me in the makeup chair and he brought out what looked to me in the mirror like a meat cleaver. And he literally just went, whack, split my skull right open, ripped it open. I thought he was going to kill me. But he just split it open and he just ripped it open. And I got my hands in, I just scratched my hand for about 10 minutes. The happiest 10 minutes of my life.
Wow. What an
So
experience.
like
That's
that,
a memory.
Yeah. So, physically it was difficult. There's no doubt about that. But we were all young. So, and we knew we were kind of in something that was significant. We didn't realize quite how significant.
Yeah. And there were 3 people involved in the creation of Jabba the Hutt as far as bringing him to life. Any memories of Toby Philpott?
Well, yeah, I need to, but we'd see. There were 7 people involved in getting Jabba to move. There were some guys outside who were operating remotes. They were doing the eyes and the tongue and God knows what, I don't know. And then there were the guys who were underneath. The set was built up on a platform so that they could go underneath and get in there and operate up. And we would stop fairly frequently so that they could just come out. It was like they were in a submarine, a midget submarine, and they could come out and just get some air, and have a cup of tea or a cup of some water or whatever. So we saw them all the time. We knew who they were. We didn't. What I did, I wasn't very sure of who. Sometimes a puppeteer was operating a puppet that he'd also made. So you weren't very sure precisely who was what. All these people were known as puppeteers, but some of them were actors and some of them were actually technicians. But yeah, I knew Mr. Philpott, and way back then, we looked very different then. Our hair was a different color, and we were a young man, unspoiled.
Yeah, exactly. And traveling to the shows, the different Comic Cons or conventions over the years, what was it like meeting the fans for the first time? And do you have a fan interaction that stands out over the years?
Jeremy Bullock, who played Boba Fett.
Yes.
I knew Jeremy just as an actor, and he sometime after the films were made, he called me and he'd bring me up every now and again. We speak, and he'd say, "Why do you come to one of these conventions?" I said, "Well, what are they?" He said, "Well, I go to a place like Florida. They fly me over. I get off the plane. I'm met by people dressed up as Boba Fett. They take me to this place. I sign autographs and I get paid for it. And I said, get out of here. Don't be silly. Nothing like that can possibly happen. He said, no, it happens. Why do you do it? There's a group called Men in Masks, I think. And they'd like you to come over and do some signings in America. And I said, no, well, come on, Jeremy, come on. This is just silly. I just didn't believe him. I just did not believe him. And then he called me one time where I had gone through a really rough patch as an actor, as you do. And I was broke, basically. And my wife is American. And she said, what do you go? So I said, have you got one of these conventions coming up? He said, yeah, there's one in Detroit, Motown. I thought, Motown, wow, Thelma Motown. And I said, is there any chance I could go? He said, let me get back to you. He got back and said, yeah, they'd love to have you over. So I went over not knowing what to expect. And there was a table with photographs of Bib and pens, stuff like that. There was this huge hall. It was just like they are now, except Star Wars were the only people from the films there. It was Dave Prowse. There was the droids, and Dave Price, and Jeremy and me. That's it. That was it. And there was a little queue at my table, and these young guys came up. They wanted autographs, and they said, "Say one of your lines." And I said, "I can't remember. I can't remember any of my lines." And they recited Bib's entire part for me. And that was the point where I thought, hello, there's something going on here. This is kind of strange. And people were coming up and they're talking about the film. And so this was my first encounter with fans of any description apart from, signing the odd autograph at a stage door. And it really, I found it very difficult to comprehend in a way. And I did some more, and they got bigger and bigger. Then the Trekkies turned up, and there was Star Wars and Star Trek. And then it gradually mushroomed into what it is today, which is this gigantic global, it's almost like an enterprise, free market, industrialized collectibles and autograph market. So it was, initially I just thought this is extraordinary, but it's great that you can have these kind of fans. It was a while before I did one in Britain, because they weren't happening in Britain, and then we did one in Britain, and I got some photographs printed, and I turned up. I only took 20 photographs. I thought, that's all I'll need. There's not going to be very many people there. I'd run out of photographs within about the first 4 minutes. Some of the Brits were doing it as well, and it's gone on like that, and. I mean, it's extraordinary now, 40 years later. I'm still having people come out, having people who weren't even born then coming up, talking about the film and loving it, kids, and you think, what is the power of this film, these films, that 40 years later, they've still got such a grip on the public imagination. It's extraordinary. I have no explanation for it. Do you know Oliver Ford Davis, the actor? He was in one of the later. Yeah, I did a convention with Ollie. It was a charity gig down in Cornwall, Devon, in southwest England, and it was just a little one. And we always get asked that same question: what is it you think that has made the Star Wars sustain itself over all the decades and successive generations? And he was asked that question. And he said, I don't know, really. I don't really wholly understand it. He said, except that as human beings, we're very interested in archetypes, always have been. And Star Wars deals in archetypes. He said, I think it just plugs into something fundamental to us as human beings. Yeah. And I thought that was the best description I've heard of it. I think he's right. It does actually tap into something very basic to us as human beings, the concepts of good and evil, and struggle and temptation and stuff like that. I mean, they're quite mythic in the way, kind of folkloric, etc. They're definitely part of that kind of context, I think. Yeah. But it's interesting. I like it now. I get it. I feel much easier doing it, and I have a bit of a banter and a bit of a laugh now. Usually because I'm so old it's difficult to correlate this salt white-haired man with Bib Fortuna.
I met you at Rhode Island Comic Con. This was probably 2014. It was a while ago.
Yeah,
But yeah, it'd be great to see you back out in Rhode Island, at some point. They still do a big one out there.
yeah. My nephew lives in Rhode Island.
Oh, wow. No way.
Yeah, yeah. He lives in Rhode Island. He's a former fire chief.
Wow. Small
Yeah,
world.
yeah, yeah. I've been there. I've been to Rhode Island a couple of times just on holiday. It's lovely. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Beautiful
where I
place.
live and been here all my life. So,
Wow, it's lovely.
yeah.
Lovely part of America.
Now, when it comes to the action figures, the first time you saw your action figure in person, what kind of feeling did you get?
Well, it was very, very odd. I just thought this is kind of strange. Uh, I bought one for my daughter and one for my son, and I've got a collection of them downstairs. It was weird. It was weird. We didn't know what to make of it, because this was a completely new experience
Yeah.
to us as actors. We sort of worked in theatre and rep and in the West End, on the odd telly. This was totally new. This was having figures made of you. Dermot Crowley, who was a great chum of mine, who was in Jedi, his agent objected to the way in which his image was used for nothing, and they actually had the goal to take on Lucasfilms and demand some sort of a payment. I don't know what it was, and this argument went on for years, and eventually they settled with Dermot in some way, and he still turns up at the conventions. It's not as if they bore him any, grief or whatever. They're pretty good about it. But yeah, it was very, very weird. I've met so many people. My wife's an osteopath, a European osteopath, and she'll be treating people. And we've got a little room, which is at the back of the house, which is her clinic, and she'll treat people. And when people come to an osteopath, it's almost like going to a therapist eventually. They start telling them things about their life. And frequently she's come across people who say, they start talking about Star Wars. And so she waits and she says, well, actually, my husband is an actor. He was an actor, and he was in one of the original Star Wars films. And the next thing I know is she comes bustling downstairs and says, can you sign a photo? Sign a photo to Jeff. Okay, he's upstairs. He's a Star Wars fan. He had a model of you when he was a kid, So I took out a photo. I wrote it to Jeff. Do you want to go? Best wishes, Bib Fortuna, Michael Carter. Give it to him. He's going out the door looking at the. She maintains that it helps him with the physical injury much. It's very effective for that. So it's all over the place. Now I meet people. I did a tour. I've done tours as an actor and worked in the theatre, worked in the National Theatre. And there's been younger actors in the cast, very successful actors, who've come up to me and said, somebody told me you were in Return of the Jedi. Yeah. You played Bib Fortuna. Yeah. I used to have a model of Bib Fortuna. I've still got it, And this is standing in the wings of the National Theatre. So that's extraordinary. It's kind of, the character's better known than I am, which is the way it should be.
I always enjoyed the line "Jabba no bother."
Jabba no bother.
That was a good one. I always remember that. Now, when it comes to the actual costume of Bib Fortuna, was that preserved? Is that somewhere now?
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know. We all knew that at the end of shooting, there was going to be a kind of rush to get bits of Bib Fortuna. By that time, anything relating to Star Wars was highly valuable. I remember the first morning's filming, sitting in the dressing room, and I've got my call sheet, which you get the night before. You get a call sheet, tells you when, which scenes, the sequence of shooting, when you're going to be on, etc., etc. and which scenes are going to be shot, who the characters are, and the names of the actors, names of the crew. Guy knocks on the door, and we've got 3 call sheets. Nick Dudman's, mine, Richard Glass's. Says, "Can I have the call sheets, please?" So he picks up the call sheets, and away he goes. He had an American accent. I said to Nick Dudman, I said, "What's that about? Why are they taking the call sheets away?" He said, "Well, he sends them to America, and they sell them." I said, "They sell the call sheets?" He said, "Oh yeah. There's everything in this production now is really, really valuable. You know, people want to get bits of it. There's a whole market out there, whole commodity market, and bits of Star Wars memorabilia." So what I wanted to do at the very end of Bib was just to get the eyes, the haptic lenses in their case, and nick them, take them home, put them on the shelf. They were gone before I got back to the dressing room, And years later, they turned up in a documentary, a BBC documentary, about the history of spectacles. And there they were on the screen. I thought, those are Bib's eyes. And the voiceover to this documentary said, "These are contact lenses. And this is a very famous pair of contact lenses. They were worn by a character called Bib Fortuna in a film, Return of the Jedi." And it then cut to Richard Glass, who was the optician who looked after me. He was the one that nicked them. He'd stolen them. Richard just never told me. So I don't know what happened to the costume. I mean, I don't know if it's still preserved somewhere. I would think certainly bits of it would have disappeared. The costume department would have held on to anything they could get their hands on, but there was stuff disappearing all over the place.
And from a character standpoint, what would you say Bib Fortuna is to Jabba the Hutt?
Well, he's kind of Jabba's useful idiot in a way. He's like a major domo. He'll do as he's told. He's under Jabba's influence. I mean, I always say to people, I don't think Bib is fundamentally a bad person. I think he just comes from a difficult family, and he fell in with bad company.
Right.
In another situation, he'd have been a very nice chap. I just tried to play the nice part of that guy. But he will do anything Jabba tells him to. He's like he's not a slave exactly, but he has status at the court of Jabba the Hutt. There's no doubt about that. But he's not the brightest bulb in the shop, Bib. He really isn't.
Yeah.
So he's one of those guys who probably just keeps messing everything up, and Jabba gives him a clout and sorts it out for himself. But he's loyal to Jabba. He's loyal to his lapdog. He knows which side his bread is buttered.
Yeah. And, as far as Mark Hamill and working with him closely, did you get any interaction over the years with him?
I haven't seen Mark since the film. No, I mean, he used to have a huge dressing room because of the stuff I was having to wear. And we had 2 really good coffee machines, so we could make good coffee. So everybody came in for coffee. And Mark was always in there. We had sofas and armchairs and magazines. People could relax. It was like a green room. I'd be sitting in my dentist's chair, resting my neck. Mark was in there a lot, and so was C-3PO, having coffee. And he's a nice guy, a very interesting guy to talk to. But I haven't seen him since. I haven't come in contact with him. I saw Carrie a couple of times at big conventions. I mean, they don't do that many. Well, in those days, they didn't.
Right. And is it true that they asked you to come back as the Bib Fortuna character?
No, not as far as I know. No. No, they didn't need to. I mean, I met the actor who played that, and he's much younger than I am. You had to be young to do that, to carry all that stuff. Nowadays, if they were doing a Bib, the actor would wear a ski mask, with electronic structural points on it, and that would be picked up by the camera, and it would all be done digitally. But in those days, it had to be glued on. So no, that was it. I was the original Bib, and that was it.
And what's your opinion on that? Doing digital and a lot of CGI as opposed to, the puppetry and the actual physical pieces?
And CGI is wonderful. You can do things in CGI that were completely and utterly impossible. Some CGI is just extraordinary, and it's got to get better with AI enhancing it. Nevertheless, I feel, certainly from an acting point of view, it's much better if you can have that moment that I had where you get up out of the makeup chair for the first time, you cross a full length mirror, and you see who you are. That's it, that's who I am. Suddenly everything begins to make sense. It's like some mysterious collation goes on within you as an actor, and you kind of instinctively know how to do it. The hand movements are going to be quite delicate,
Yeah.
and it's going to be appearing in slightly jerky emotions. If that's added on electronically later, you've got nothing to work on. You might have images of what the final character will look like, but it's trickier for the actors themselves. They don't inhabit the costume. If you are playing in the theatre, if you're playing a Roman general, you're rehearsing in t-shirts and jeans, and then one day you get to put on the uniform of a Roman general with the helmet and everything and the sword. That changes you. That gives you something additional to your performance. It kind of rounds it off. Suddenly you kind of realize you become the complete thing. And it's difficult if you don't have that experience of wearing the stuff. And some of the effects, I think some of the physical effects, to my mind, if they're well done, are always better. But they're so expensive. If you're going to blow up the Empire State Building, what are you going to do? You're going to do it CGI, aren't you?
Yeah.
I always remember, I don't know if you ever see a film, Bridge in the River Kwai.
No, I haven't
A
seen that.
war film about British prisoners in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. Alec Guinness played the lead, and he played this deranged officer who cracks the whip and forces the British prisoners of war to build this bridge for the Japanese, this railway bridge. It was shot in Ceylon by David Lean. And at the very end, the bridge gets blown up. William Holden comes on, sets some fuses, blows it up. That bridge was actually built. It was a real bridge, like a huge bridge, a huge wooden bridge. It was actually built. The train coming down the line was a real train with real carriages. The bridge was actually blown up. They had 7 cameras on it at the time. So each camera, it must have been the most nervous moment in each of those cameramen's lives, because they were all filming this. They had to get it in focus. It had to be right, because they were not going to rebuild the bridge and blow it up again if they got it wrong.
Right.
So they had to do it, and it's just extraordinary. It's real. You see it. It's real. They cut from this camera, this one. It's just fantastic. The train toppling into the river. It's just so real, because it was real. So, I mean, if you can do that, it's better. But you can't do that. David Lean could do it, but very few other people can do it. So, I mean, I think CGI is great. It's a great breakthrough. And it provides such wonderful backdrops to things. If you set a film in London in the 60s, the skyline's totally different to what it is now. You can just map that in with CGI. It's great. You can do that, So
Another
that's the future. Yeah.
another big project you were a part of was The Keep. And the costume was very extravagant looking in that as well. How was that in comparison to Bib Fortuna as far as a costume?
It was much easier to wear because it was something I sort of stepped into, and nothing was glued on me. And I would put the head on, and it would be fastened in place, and I could take it off. I had glass fiber lines coming in the back of my head around to the mouth and the eyes, which would light up with lasers, clipped onto my teeth and in front of my eyes. I could actually see not very well, but I could actually see in the Keep much better than I could in Return of the Jedi, oddly enough, because all I had in Jedi was kind of little holes drilled in the middle of the haptic lenses, so I had a bit of tunnel vision. I couldn't really see. I was always bouncing off people. So in that sense, the Keep was much easier to work with. It was a real luxury for me to be able to take the top off. huge sets, apart from the tunnel set, so you didn't get too hot. It was a a breeze in that sense. So it was a hard film to make.
What advice do you have for somebody who's just getting into the industry now and looking to get involved, and they just looking for that bit of advice?
It's the toughest profession in the world. When it's going well, it's the best profession in the world. When it's going badly, it's the worst. And I think if you can get something else going at the same time, whether it's within the profession or outside the profession, that takes the pressure off you, um, having to get the next job to pay the bills, to pay the tax, that's much healthier. It promotes a much better balance, I think, in you. When you go for a job and you don't arrive at the interview stage, nowadays it's by doing tapes, self-tapes usually. But you don't have that terrible stress and pressure of having to get this next job. You don't want it too much. There was an old saying that among directors and producers and writers that you could smell an actor wanted a job too much when the second he came in the room, and that somehow or other put people off. The people who tended to get the jobs are the ones who are more relaxed. And I think in order to get that state of relaxation, if you're finding it difficult to get your feet in the acting profession, then make sure you've got something else to fall back on, some kind of job. I mean, most young actors do. They've got some other job. Some teach drama. They run workshops. Others just work in a completely different industry. Some work within the industry. Some eventually go over to work in the industry and become something else. It's just much more balanced. And to some degree, I don't think it matters where you train or if you train. To be honest, if you've got a basic sort of capacity to act, you'll get there eventually. Just watch the good people. The boss of my old drama school, he was a brilliant man called Hugh Cropwell, used to say, if you watch great actors acting, you'll learn nothing. Because they're so talented, you can't see how they do it. So the best way to learn how to be an actor, is to watch bad actors, because you see what they're doing wrong. And that's very good advice.
Yeah, I haven't heard that before. That's a good point.
Sometimes the best way of learning is by watching somebody who's not very good at it,
Yeah.
And just be open the whole time, be an open mind, Just bend with the breeze as much as you can. It all comes out of relaxation. That was the thing they drummed into us at drama school. You've got to be relaxed. You must be relaxed. Everything must come out of relaxation. But it's an extremely difficult profession to be relaxed in. But if you can hit that state of relaxation, then that's the best place to come from. Don't be too tense about it.
You've also written as well, on the other side of things, One Man's War, which was a 1991 film starring Anthony Hopkins. What was that experience like, kind of co-writing a big film like that?
Well, it was a kind of weird experience. I came in as a writer. I was brought in as a writer. My first wife worked in the industry, and she thought I could write, and they were having trouble with the script. And somebody else in the industry, I can't remember who it was always exhorting me to write scripts. I wasn't sure I could do it. Anyway, they kind of brought me in this film. I was working with a director, Brazilian director. They had a script which was a representation of a true story about a political crime in Paraguay. So what is a Scottish actor who lives in London writing a script about a political murder in Paraguay? That's the way the world goes. Anyway, I looked at it and they said, do you want to work in this for a while, see if we can get another draft out of it? If there's something wrong with it, structurally and whatever. Dialogue's a bit still thin. So I said, yeah, okay. I was working in the National Theatre, I remember, as an actor. Was I? No, I was in the West End. I was doing a big theatre show. So I'd be working at night. I worked during the day with the director on the script. And he went back to Brazil. And I said to the producer, I think I might be able to do something on this, but I need to go back to page one, to a blank sheet. And they said, okay, do that. They'd paid number of writers, and they'd put so much money into it. They thought, well, we'll just give this guy a small amount of money, and if he can come up with something that's great, and if he can't, we'll shut down the whole project. It was a problem project. Anyway, I wrote my own first draft using quite a lot of the previous writers. One of the previous writers' bits of stuff. He was a good writer, and but a lot of it was quite original on my part. And my first wife was very good as an editor. She encouraged me to think in an original fashion. And they liked that, and eventually we hammered out the script, which was then ready to be offered to various actors. And I was in on the casting discussions about who should play the leading role. It was very strange for me, as an actor who's walking the boards at night at the National Theatre or the West End or wherever I was, to be talking about actors that I thought might be suitable who might not be. And one of the actors they talked about was Tony Hopkins, Anthony Hopkins. I knew Tony. I'd been his understudy at the National when he played Anthony in Antony and Cleopatra. I was his understudy.
Oh, wow.
I got really well, and we got on really well, and we laughed about and we joked. And I saw him quite often, and it was before he moved to America. And so they offered, I said, well, Tony could certainly do this. Really, it should be a South American actor, but he could do this, Tony. So he was offered it, and he said, yeah. And he didn't know that I'd written it until just before he went filming. He thought it was another Mike Carter. He just didn't know I'd written it. I didn't tell him, because I thought, I don't know why I didn't tell him. I just thought it would be easier for him if I didn't tell him. Ruben Blades wanted to be in it. He'd read the script, and he wanted to play the lawyer, but he wanted the part expanded. And I'd been forced to cut the part of the lawyer, which I saw as an important part. So I then just put back in everything I'd cut, been forced to cut. So he was quite happy. So they went off to Mexico to film it in Santa Cruz. I was doing Merchant of Venice with Dustin Hoffman in the West End. I went off to New York to do Broadway with Dustin. And I got a postcard saying there had been a number of rewrites. I knew there would be with this director. I knew there would be. And it's a common story that you hear screenwriters talking about again, but the rewrites were just, he'd put back in stuff that he had wanted in that I'd said wasn't really appropriate. It was an unhappy shoot, and Tony was very unhappy with the rewrites, really unhappy. He'd just done Silence of the Lambs, so he was on a high. You got this great actor. He turns up and he said, I didn't accept this script. I accepted a script written by Mike Carter. Anyway, that was then, and the film kind of disappeared. But I thought I'd arrived as a screenwriter. And, I could order put a down payment on the blue Bentley.
Right. Well, you've had your hands all ends of it, from, like I said, from theater to film to television, a little bit of the writing there. And, it's great to see your career unfold all these years and so many great projects that you've been a part of. Looking back at it all, what would you like your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered?
God, I really don't know. I really did a legacy to be remembered. I suppose as a decent actor and a decent bloke, really, That's about it. I've been lucky. I've played a range of stuff. And Bib Fortuna is definitely one of the highlights, it has to be said. And, it's been, when I look back at it, it's been great. It was sometimes murderous being an actor, wondering where the next job was coming from. But my wife, who's not in the business, keeps saying, don't moan about your career. You were much luckier than a lot of other people. And she's right. So, you've got to be grateful for the stuff that's good for you. And I'm glad I was in, I'm very grateful that Richard Marquand wouldn't take no for an answer and said, well, wait a minute, let's talk about this. And eventually persuaded me. He was a very charming man to do it, just for a bit of a giggle and a laugh. It would be good fun, he said. And it was. It was good fun. It was hard, but it was good fun. Yeah.
Michael, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure. I hope it wasn't too boring for you.
No, it was great. Great to hear all the stories. And, thank you so much for being a part of Sci-Fi Week here. So for Michael Carter, I'm Joseph Bruen, and this has been the All Access Entertainment Podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your comments. We'd like to hear your comments about the interview. And thank you for joining us for Sci-Fi Week. And until next time, thank you so much, and may the Force be with you.